Opposition, please take an extra minute after that. Thank you. Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for advance copy of his statement and for advance copy of the command paper that his office sent through an hour or so ago, and for taking time to speak to me and other opposition leaders yesterday before his speech. And can I start by acknowledging just how difficult the decisions are that now fall to be taken? We do recognise how difficult they are. What the country needs at this time is clarity and reassurance. And at the moment, both are in pretty short supply. And at the heart of the problem, it seems, is that the Prime Minister made a statement last night before the plan was written or at least finalised. And that has caused considerable confusion. So yesterday afternoon, there was a number 10 press release that said, from Monday, i.e. today, anyone who can't work from home, for instance, those in construction and manufacturing, should be actively encouraged to go to work. So it's understood from that that it was today was the start day, and that was for construction and manufacturing. A few hours later, the Prime Minister made his statement. There was no express reference to time frame. Today, in the command document, page 25, it says that these policy changes apply from Wednesday, and the list has been expanded from construction and manufacturing to other sectors. So now we have a start date of Wednesday and a wider range of sectors that are going back to work on Wednesday. So far, so good. One of the key issues then is, will there be guidelines in place to ensure safety at the workforce? They were being consulted on last Sunday. They were vague and had big gaps in. So under protective equipment, it just said to be inserted or to be added. In the document I've now seen, it says that workplaces should follow the COVID secure guidelines, which I assume are the same guidelines, as soon as practicable. But under page 22, it says they will be released later this week. So we know some people are going back to work on Wednesday. The guidelines have not been published. They're apparently going to be released later this week. So can I just ask the Prime Minister, will the guidelines, the safety guidelines, be ready for Wednesday? Which realistically means tomorrow, if workplaces are going to be ready for them for Wednesday morning. If not, is he seriously asking people to go back to work without the guidelines? Have the guidelines now been agreed with businesses and trade unions? That was the attempt that was going on Sunday week ago. And do the guidelines only apply in England? Can I then turn to getting to work, because this has been the other issue of some concern. The Prime Minister said last night that people shouldn't rely on public transport. The command paper now, page 26, says the government is working with transport providers to bring services back to pre-COVID-19 levels as soon as possible. So bring the services back to their old levels, and says social distancing guidelines on public transport must then be rigorously followed. So ramp up the service, new guidelines for social distancing. But again, we learned from page 26, unfortunately, those guidelines not ready. And they're coming later in the week. Well, are they coming tomorrow, ready for Wednesday, or later in the week? Because otherwise people will be using public transport, operators required to operate to guidelines that don't yet exist. And again, is that for England only? And have those guidelines been agreed with the transport providers and the relevant trade unions? Mr. Speaker, one other point about work. There is a real concern that the Prime Minister might be able to clarify for those that have got childcare responsibilities, with schools not going back till June, and I understand the conditionality behind that. Should they go back to work on Wednesday or not? Because they're in a quandary as to what to do. Can I then turn to international travel? Last night, the Prime Minister said in his speech that he was proposing to impose quarantine on people coming into the country by air. Well, given that 100,000 people have arrived in the UK since the start of lockdown, why is that only being introduced now? And is it only for those arriving by air? Because the command paper now says it's for all international arrivals. So does that mean all ports? And again, is that England or the UK? But it then goes on to say these international travel measures, i.e. the quarantine, will not come into force on Wednesday, unlike the other policy changes, but will be introduced as soon as possible. So when's that going to be? The Prime Minister also said we're going to be driven by the science, the data and public health. So what is the scientific evidence and the public health basis behind the measures announced and the stay alert message? And finally, the Prime Minister will know that there's not consensus either on messaging now or on policy between the UK government and those in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Not something I know he wanted to see, but now we're in that position. Raises serious concerns with a real danger of divergence. And again, this is clear from the document that he provided to me an hour or so ago. Page 27 says, travel to outdoor spaces is now permitted irrespective of distance, but we must respect the different rules in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Does that mean one can travel to the border but not presumably beyond the border where there are differences, which makes enforcement extremely difficult and clarity really difficult? So what can we do, what can he do to ensure that we exit lockdown as one united kingdom just as we entered it? Mr. Speaker, there are lots of questions, but so far precious few answers. The country does need clarity on this, and people need reassurance above all else. They need it in the next 48 hours. So can the Prime Minister now please provide that clarity?
Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful for all the questions that the right honourable gentleman has raised and the spirit in which he's raised them. And let's be absolutely clear, what we're trying to do now, and I think he was good enough to refer to himself. We're moving from a situation in which the people of this country have had the overwhelming impression that there's a very clear and simple piece of advice, Mr. Speaker, that we all have to obey, which is, broadly speaking, stay at home. And the people of this country have, by and large, followed that advice in perhaps more emphatically, more thoroughly than many other populations around the world. But thanks to their efforts, what's happened is that we've got the disease. We've made huge progress, Mr. Speaker, in fighting the disease. We've got the R down, and we need now to begin, as it were, to acknowledge the progress that has been made and to take the small, limited steps that we can with the R down where it is. And that's what the government is trying to do. And clearly, when you're coming out of a message that is so gloriously simple as stay at home, there will inevitably be complexities that he's rightly alluded to. Let me try and deal with some of the issues that he raised. What we're saying now is that you should stay at home if you can, but go to work if you must, if your job doesn't allow you to go to work. And plainly, he raised properly the issue of people who don't have the right childcare, Mr. Speaker, and we will count on employers to be reasonable. If people can't go to work because they can't get the childcare that they need, then plainly they are impeded from going to work, and they must be defended and protected on that basis. If their kids can't yet go to school because the schools aren't back, then plainly they can't go to work. And I think people with common sense, businesses, employers with common sense do understand that. I think it's incumbent on all of us to get that message across. But I think one thing that was perhaps missing from his analysis, Mr. Speaker, was the simple fact that over the last couple of months, actually plenty of businesses, from construction to manufacturing, office businesses of all kinds, actually have been proceeding, and they have been working. They've been doing so in a way that respects social distancing, that is as COVID compliant as possible. And so, to answer his specific questions about the timescale for the publications of our guidelines, we will be publishing the guidelines on places of employment today, tonight. Transport will be out tomorrow, and we're being very, very consistent in what we've said throughout this period. At the very beginning, we said that you should stay at home if you can, go to work if you must. What's changed now is the emphasis and the encouragement that we're giving to people, as it were, to follow the initial guidance of March the 23rd, I think it was. He asks, Mr. Speaker, about what science it's going to be based on, and how we've reached the conclusions that we have. As I said last night, as I told the House, the reproduction rate of the disease is now between 0.5 and 0.9. It varies across the country, as he rightly says, and that's why actually different approaches by the devolved administrations are to be welcomed where those are appropriate to their specific needs. But overall, and I think that all leaders of the devolved administrations would confirm this, there is a very, very strong desire to move forward as 4 nations together. And perhaps I can sum up, and we all share the strong view that you should stay at home if you can. That remains the position. So the steps we're taking today are modest steps, entirely governed by the science. We hope that we may be in a position, and this is entirely conditional, to take further steps in. Forgive me, Mr. Speaker. Further steps in the next few weeks. He asks an entirely, given the complexity of what's being said, and he raises a perfectly reasonable point about people moving across the border into Wales for recreational purposes, or I totally and believe me, there will be myriad other hypothetical situations which people will be able to raise. But let's be absolutely clear, Mr. Speaker, that I think everybody understands what we are trying to do together. And that is working together as a country to obey the social distancing rules, which everybody understands. And I think what the British people understand, that this is the moment for the whole country to come together and to obey those rules and to apply their common sense in the application of those rules. And I have huge admiration for the way that the police have enforced them so far, and I know that the British public is going to continue to help the police and everybody to enforce those rules, to get our reproduction rate down, to get this disease even further under control by continuing to apply good, solid British common sense. It's worked throughout phase 1, and I have no doubt that it's going to work in the second phase of the disease as well, of the fight against the disease as well.
We will make America great again.